Good morning again. Want to say welcome to those of you who are watching online. My friends up in Brewster who are watching, shout out to you guys especially. I want to give a shout out to Kyle Wolber up there because today the Seahawks play the Vikings. And I guarantee you, I don't know this for sure, but I would put money on the fact that he's sitting there in a purple jersey, looking all smug. So Kyle, we're going to see what happens today, buddy. All right? My name is Graham, and I'm excited to jump into this stuff today. I don't know what your week or month has looked like, but our Advent season, those weeks before Christmas, are very busy at my house. We have a lot of traditions, a lot of traditions. My wife, I'm pretty sure if she had the opportunity, she would have married Santa Claus instead of myself. She's like one of those Christmas people, like loves Christmas, right? So we have all the normal traditions, you know, we go up and we go into the woods and we cut down a tree because we want to watch it, you know, have a slow death in our house. And we decorate it and there's a pickle inside of it. I don't know where that comes from, but we do that anyways. We bake the cookies, we do all the Christmas concerts, we make the card and we pass it out. We do all the things, right? And then we have some, I mean, those are what everybody does, it feels like. But then we have some that only we do ourselves. We actually host our own little Christmas concerts so our kids can showcase their piano, and we have very specific recipes that we make for certain times, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and the day after. And it's like, there's just a lot of these traditions. And some of these I look at and I'm like, I don't even know where this started, right? Like when did we start doing this? I don't know, okay? Some of these things, I know that they're like traditions that we all do, and I still don't know why we do them. Like I had to look up, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, I had to look up why we put Christmas trees in our house. I didn't know that. I'll just do it. You know, you just want to, we got a big tree this year. Like we did like a Clark Griswold kind of tree where you're going to put the tree that big kind of thing. Like it's 10 feet, and it was a lot of work, and I don't even know why I'm doing it. I just drug it into my house, and I'm like, why do we do that? So I had to look it up. Again, you make fun of me if you know why we do this, but I didn't know that about 500 or 600 years ago, the Lutherans in Germany started doing this where they would bring a tree into the church, is where it started. When people are like, oh, Christmas trees, that's not Christian. It is. It started with the Lutherans, and they would bring a tree into their churches around the Advent season, so around this time, and it was to remind them of where this whole story started. They called it the tree of paradise. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It reminded them of the Garden of Eden, and they would put it up on their stage, and it would remind them that this is why Jesus came. He started then, he's here now, and so they would decorate that tree. They would put apples on it. That's why we put red bulbs on our trees. They would put apples on it to remind them of the fruit that was eaten, and then they would put white wafers, these little, they taste like cardboard, but they're like that you would take for the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, right? The bread and the wine, they would put those on the tree too to remind them of all these other parts of God's story. And I was like, okay, I had to look this up to figure that out. Now, I don't know about you. We put a star on top of our tree. It seems like there's two camps that people sit in. You either do the star or you do the angel. We're star people, personally. It doesn't matter to me. It's not something I'm going to go to battle about. But I know why we put a star on the tree. That's like one thing I was like, oh, yeah, hey, I remember that one from Sunday school. Like, I know that one because we put a star on there because this whole story, this whole nativity thing, starts with a star. And there's these group of men, we call them the Magi, it's short for magicians. Sometimes we call them wise men. It's the same group, okay? We don't know how many of them there were. We don't know exactly when they showed up, but we know that they followed a star. They saw this super bright star in the sky, and these people, they're kind of hard to describe because were they real magicians? Did they know real magic? I'm not sure how that worked. I know that they studied all kinds of religions. And that's why they were not Jewish, but they knew about Judaism. They knew that there would be a Jewish king born when there would be this star in the sky because they studied the Old Testament. But were they like real magicians? I don't know. I kind of think of have you ever used, this is a terrible analogy, but have you ever used a Mr. Clean magic eraser? Yeah. And it's like magic, but you're sure that it's not magic. I mean, those things are pretty amazing. I don't know. Those things can wipe sin away. Those things are pretty incredible things, right? And I don't know, because there's magicians at this time who had little tricks, but there was also people who practiced magic. So I don't know what camp they sat in exactly. But I do know that they follow a star and they show up at Herod's palace, and it says this. They say, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Now these magi travel over 1,000 miles across the desert. They're following a star, and they're trying to figure out where is this king born. And there's some things we can learn in Scripture by what's said, and we can also learn some things by what is not said. And here's what's really cool. Herod doesn't ask them. He doesn't say, "Hey, what star are you guys talking about?" Herod sees the star too. I'm willing to bet everyone in the Middle East sees the star. Because Herod, if you read the rest of the story, Herod gets really weird after this, right? And it wasn't just because some randos showed up and asked him about the King of the Jews. He must have seen a star and knew something big was going to happen. Now, what's really cool, and I like this kind of stuff, I get nerdy, but if we look into Chinese historical astronomy, which is a thing, I guess, we know that the Chinese, 2,000 years ago, documented this star. In China, they could see this star as it passed by Earth. It was there for weeks and weeks. We know that this star would have been visible from the Middle East, and the journey that the Magi took would have looked like the star was traveling away from them, or as if they were following the star. And I just think that stuff is so cool. Again, that's Chinese history. That's not written down by Jews. And so the Magi followed this star. Herod starts to freak out, right? Because he knows something big is happening here. And here's what's crazy. Where did the wise men go? We kind of get messed up because the nativity scene, there's always 3 of these dudes holding like really nicely wrapped presents, right? In every nativity scene. We don't know that there was 3 of them. We do know what kind of gifts that they brought, but they weren't at the nativity. They weren't there when Jesus was born. Where did they go? They went to the palace. Now, why would you go to the palace? Oh, yeah, well, I wasn't really looking for an answer, but thank you, my son. I appreciate that. So, we're going to be interactive today. But you're right, dude. You're totally right. You go to the palace because you're looking for the king, right? Nobodies are born in the stables. Nobodies are born at home. Kings are born in a palace. And that's why they go to the palace, because they're looking for a king. Now, we kind of get titles, we don't like titles very much. We in the Pacific Northwest, but just on the West Coast, when it comes to Westerners in general, we're some of the least traditional people on the earth, right? We just don't really do titles that much. And so to call someone a king or to even think about what it means to have a king is very foreign to us. But titles are important. Titles are important, and sometimes it's your relationship to somebody that dictates the title that you give them, right? I have titles for different people in my life. Some of them are formal, some of them are not formal. If you walk up to my car, depending on who you are, I might call you officer or not, right? There's different titles. One of them, my wife, I have a title for her. I call her Kayla, my love. Right? Her name and her title in my life. She's the only person that I call Kayla, my love. I'm pretty sure she's the only one I'm pretty sure nobody else calls her that. I'm actually hoping nobody else calls her that, right? You could call her that, right? But I call her Kayla, my love. That's a title that also defines our relationship, right? I don't know if you've ever gotten into, Kayla and I watched all of the Crown on Netflix about the British royal family. And it's interesting because even Queen Elizabeth's children, when they walk into the room where she is, even though they call her mummy, right, they still have to bow or curtsy to her because of her title, right? The title can dictate the relationship and back and forth, right? Let me give you another example. Recently, my niece, Henley, she's 6 years old, and she started calling me Graham, right? Which is my name, but it sounds so weird coming from her. I don't know if she says it weird or it's because she doesn't usually call me that, but all of a sudden she started calling me Graham. And I was like, finally I'm like, Henley, and I get down, I say, Henley, sweetheart, there are only 7 people in the whole world that can call me Uncle G. And you are one of them, right? There's only 7 people that get this special relationship with me to call me Uncle G, and she's one of them. The relationship dictates the title can dictate the relationship as well. Now, this is good in both ways, because sometimes it shows us the proximity, it shows us how close we are to somebody, and sometimes it shows us the distance a little bit, right? I was at the gym a couple weeks ago, and there was this kid, he looks like maybe, 20, 23, I don't know, somewhere in that age, right? And he's trying to do this deadlift, and I could tell he's like kind of going for a PR. He's building up to this. And I'm watching him for 2 reasons. I'm rooting him on. I want him to, PR at the gym. The other reason is because I've seen videos, but I've never seen it live where somebody deadlifts and locks their knees and then passes out, and I'm still hoping I can witness that in person at some point. So I'm watching this kid. He tries to get this lift up. He doesn't do it. He gets kind of frustrated. He takes a lap around the gym, comes back. He resets himself. He grabs the bar again, and he gets it up, and he's beaming from ear to ear, and he's looking around, and he's lifting by himself, and nobody's showing him any attention because it's 2024, and everybody has their earbuds in, right? You don't talk to people at the gym. And he's so excited, and I decide I'm going to go give him I'm going to give him some love. So I take a couple steps over, I pop my earbud out, I put my fist out. He gives me a pound. No, he still has his earbuds in, and he does that thing where people talk too loud because they have their earbuds in still. And he says, "Thank you, sir." And I was like, "Sir?" I was like, "Who are you talking to?" And it created this, I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm not 25 anymore." It made me remember how not cool I am. Another great example of this is as a pastor, it's a weird title. Being called pastor is a weird title. I feel very unworthy most of the time people say that. Most people don't call me that, probably for good reason. And if I met you on a plane or something and you said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" I wouldn't say pastor. That's not the first thing I would say. People have weird relationships with church and with pastors. So I usually say, "Oh, I work for a church." And sometimes we get to, "Oh, you're a pastor. Oh, that's cool." Or, "Oh, hey, that's all right. Well, let's talk about something else." Right? So because pastor can create this distance of "Oh, you're a pastor, you're different, you're set apart, you represent this organization or this religion." But sometimes too, pastor can bring people together. For some of you, you've had to call me at night or during the day and say, "Hey, I need you." And when I show up to the hospital, and it's the best and worst part of my job, when I show up to the hospital in people's times of needs, and I say, "Hey, I need to visit this person, they're in room 203, and then they say, "Okay, who should I tell them is here?" I always say, "It's their pastor." Because that's who you need in that moment. And the title of pastor can create this proximity, sometimes distance. So when we look at the birth of Jesus, and sometimes we get really wrapped up in the fact that Jesus came down as this 8-pound, 6-ounce baby wrapped in swaddling cloth, and isn't it just amazing and how cute, and look at him in the little manger scene and yada yada, but we forget that this is the birth of a king. Right? The birth of a nobody, the birth of a commoner is not really worth documenting, but the birth of a king, the son of a king. Now that's something we need to check into. That's something we need to look into. That's why they went to look for him in the palace, because they were looking for a king. And it wasn't just any king, because his title was special, but his name was special as well. It says this in Matthew chapter 1. "She will give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus, because he will save people from their sins." And the name Jesus, probably pronounced Yeshua, means God saves. It goes on to say, "Look, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel," which means God with us. This is not just the birth of any baby. It's not just the birth of a king. It's the birth of a king with a very specific name and a very specific title. He is the God with us. That name, Emmanuel, is a name and a title combined together. And that name, God with us, God will dwell with us, God will be with us, is a very special name. Now, names in our culture are maybe not as important as they used to be. especially in this culture, in Jewish culture, names were very, very important. They had meaning, they carried weight. I love a good name personally. I'm maybe a connoisseur of names. As I meet people, I like to find unique names. I think it's cool. Kayla and I named our kids some very unique names. When we were having kids, it seemed like you either gave them a unique name or you named them after an old man. And that was just kind of the theme at the time. And so we went the unique route, gave our kids unique names. These are my kids up here if I haven't met you before. My son is Riot, and my daughters are True, Lively, and Daily. And every one of their names, this is the day we got the giant Christmas tree. One of them helped get the tree down. I'll let you figure out who it was. And when we went to name them, all of their names have stories, and it takes much longer than what I have up here. But I loved giving my kids unique names. But I'll tell you this, and some of you know this, when you give your kids unique names, you get interesting feedback. People like to let you know that you didn't choose a traditional name. And they'll say things like, oh, those are interesting names you chose. And they'll ask you, why did you choose those names? And you can kind of tell with their tone of voice. Some people are generally interested. Why? Wow, those are interesting names. Why did you choose those names? And I love, let me give you the Reader's Digest version. I'll tell them the stories of how we chose each of those 4 names. But sometimes you can tell people are being a little snarky. They're kind of letting you know, hey, you didn't go the traditional route, and I'm going to kind of say that. And I have a response to that. It's not very kind. My wife doesn't love it. But when people are those are interesting names. Why would you choose names like that? And I say, all the boring names were taken, so we went with these ones. Right? It's I think names are really cool. I think names can really help define who we are and even define relationships, right? Just like a title can define or dictate our relationships, our proximity to each other, a name can do that as well. In our house, I don't know about your house, but in our house, we are, if you're in trouble, we're middle name users at our house, right? If you're not doing something right, you get the first and the middle name, right? I don't know where that comes from either, but that's what we do at our house. So right now, we have a 4-year-old. So pretty much her name is only her first and middle name right now. It comes out all the time. It's always Daily Ann. Daily Ann, what do you do? Daily Ann, put that away. Daily Ann, you can't have Sharpies. Daily Ann, take that out of your mouth. It's just always Daily Ann, Daily Ann, Daily Ann. That's her whole name right now, right? It's the only thing that we call her. And she's pretty smart for a 4-year-old. And she figured out, if you're not listening, if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, if you don't do what I want you to do, then you use the middle name and they will pay attention. So here she is in the kitchen trying to get Kayla's attention. Mommy, Mommy. She's pulling on her shirt. She's slapping her on her hip. Mommy, Mommy. Kayla's in the middle of a conversation. She's probably cleaning and cooking at the exact same time. Mommy, Mommy. And she starts louder. Mommy, Mommy. And she's grabbing her and finally she says, Mommy Ann. You're she figured it out. The name that you call somebody dictates the relationship as well, right? I don't know if you do this. I don't know if your family's like this either. We do have a lot of nicknames in our family. We do a lot of nicknames and stuff like that. People, I don't know when this happened too, when all of a sudden you had to start calling the grandparents, your kids call the grandparents, weird things. What happened to grandma and grandpa? I don't know. We've just decided that those go away. So I was out in the neighborhood, I don't know, a couple years ago, and the Rogers live across the street, and I'm talking with their girls who are, I don't know, 8 and 10, 6 and 10, something like that. And something was going on. I don't remember the details of the story, but I was like, so are your grandparents coming over? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, which ones? Because I know both sets of the grandparents. So which ones are coming over? She said, Charlie said to me, Ammy and Papa. I said, who? Ammy and Papa. Ammy? What, Ammy? And then the younger one, Ruby, says, oh, well, we call our other grandma Mucka. You call your grandma what? I said, let me get this right. You call your grandmas Ammy and Mucka? And they're like, yeah. And they're just beaming, this is normal. And I was like, these sound like names for drugs. What are we doing here? Ammy and Mucka. I don't know how you can get that. But again, there's a specialness to the name. because there's a specialness to the relationship. And the title can do that, and the name can do that. What's interesting to me is we go this whole first book of the Bible, and nobody even knows God's name. Isn't that kind of wild? Like, no one even thought to ask, like, hey, what's that guy's name, by the way? You know, the guy who, like, created the whole earth and everything? Like, did Adam and Eve, did they write that down anywhere? Because I want to send them a Christmas card, right? It's not until in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, that Moses, he's out doing something in the wilderness, and he sees this bush on fire, and then after a while, he takes a look at it, he's like, well, that bush is, like, on fire, but it's, like, not burning up. Something weird's going on. And then God starts to speak to him. And it says, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians. So go now, God says. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses has this really weird response to this. Because you'd think like, oh, 400 years of slavery, like, let's go. God's finally coming through. He gave me a sign in this bush that's not burning up. Like, you'd think he'd be all excited, but he hesitates. And it says, Moses says this, if I go to the Israelites and I tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I say to them? Like, that's a weird question. Okay? Like, Moses is going to show up, and he's going to tell all of his fellow Jews, hey, we've been in slavery for 400 years. It's time that we're going to get out of here. God's finally going to come through for us. You know how, like, he forgot about us, or it felt like he forgot about us? Like, he's coming through for us now. And their first question is going to be like, wait, what's his name? I don't feel like that's the first question they're going to ask him. Because I don't think when they're asking what his name is, they're actually asking, like, what his name is. I think it's a deeper question than that. When they say, what is his name, I think they're actually saying, can God accomplish what he's promising? And we do this too. We say this, you get promised something, you say, well, who said that? Right? Do you have the power to actually do what you're saying to do? Do you have the authority to make this decision, right? Right now, you teenagers are out of school for like 2 years, it feels like. I think it's like 2 weeks, right? You go back to school like on the 6th or something. And let's say you go back to school, and first day, my son comes back from middle school, and he says, hey, Daddy, guess what? I don't have to go to school anymore. Yeah, they just said at the school, they said, for 6 years, 6.5 years, I could just hang out here at your house, and then they'll just mail me my diploma. I don't have to go anymore. And if he comes home and he says that to me, what's the first thing I'm going to say to him? I'm going to say, are you smoking mucka right now? This doesn't make any sense to me, right? But then I'm going to say, who said that? Who at the school told you that? Is it Mr. Sanders? Because it's his first year here. I don't know if he knows what he's talking about, right? Like, maybe you need to go to the top. Talk to Wilson about this stuff, right? I'm going to ask, who said that? He says, yeah, they told me at the school, which is like the most common thing that teenagers say. Like, oh, yeah, they said. It's always they. Who's they? Right? And when we say who's they, what is their name, we're saying, can they accomplish this? Do they have the authority, the power, the credibility to do what they say they're going to do? Because there's something in a name. There's something still in a name. Right? Maybe here's an example. I have a minivan that has a lot of miles on it. Right? If we're sitting there talking about my minivan, I told you, man, it's got 200,000 miles on it. But then I said, hey, but it's a Honda. You'd say, well, it's a Honda, right? It's still got 200,000 more. Okay? For 10 years, you listening, Kyle Wolber? For 10 years as Seahawks fans, we would be down by 6 in the fourth quarter, 2 minutes left, and you would turn to whoever you're with and you'd say, hey, we got Russell. And that name, it meant something. Right? Maybe one of your kids runs into the room and they're like, hey, the 4-year-old's drawn the Mona Lisa in Sharpie on the wall over there. You say, hey, I got a Magic Clean magic eraser. Mr. Clean. Right? The name means something. Right? And it could go the opposite way too, if we're being honest. You bought a bookshelf, you put it together, you put it in the family room, and you set 6 books on it, and the whole thing fell down. And you're like, what happened? I bought it at IKEA. right? And if you don't know, IKEA is a Swedish word that means cardboard, okay? Right? The name can go either way. But the name, when Moses comes back and he says, what is his name? He's saying, who are you to promise this? Who are you to say that this is possible? Who are you to say that everything is going to be okay? And we do the same thing with God, right? When we read the Bible, when we hear that worship song, when we listen to a sermon and we hear, oh, everything's going to be okay. Hey, God's going to come through in this relationship. Hey, don't worry about that bill. I know you can't cover it right now, but God is going to take care of it. Hey, in your sadness, in your depression, in that darkness that looms over you, God is going to shine light through that. And you say, there's no way. Who are you, God, to say that you can do that? What is your name? And God, who is above names. To ask God his name, I'm sure was not, maybe offensive a little bit. This is a God who cannot be contained. One thing that I talk about with some of our leadership kids is, with the Bible, with theology, we tried to describe an infinite God with finite language. And so God accommodates Moses. And I'm sure he's thinking, well, if you have to call me something. He says, call me, I am that I am. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh in Hebrew. And he said, you must say this to the Israelites, I am has sent you. God also said to Moses, you must say this to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial from generation to generation. This name is so perfect. It's so perfect. If you got to call me something, call me I am. And in this, we don't really see this when we read the English, but there is a present and a future tense in this name. I am now and I will be forever is what he says. My name is not Marduk. My name is not Baal. My name is not Ammon, like all those other gods around you. My name is Yahweh, and that's what you will call me. And this name to the Jews is so holy, it is so special that they don't say it. They will not say this name. So they say things like Adonai, which means the Lord. They say Hashem, which means the name. And so you can imagine for a group of people where no one has whispered this name for thousands of years, and then Jesus shows up, that in this next story, like this would be wild. What happens here? See, Jesus, it says in John 8 that Jesus goes up to the Mount of Olives, and then early in the morning, he goes to the temple where he had been the day before. And this temple area is a special place. This is where God resides. This is like the epicenter of Judaism, is this place. It's the most holy place in the world. And maybe you've heard the story. They bring this woman caught in adultery to Jesus, and he deals with that matter. And then afterwards, they start asking him some questions. And they're kind of like pointed, slandering kind of questions at the same time. They're asking him, hey, are you really even fully Jewish? Is your daddy really your daddy? I'll let you figure out what that means, right? They're asking him some rough questions. And it says this, the Judeans replied, aren't we correct in saying that you are a Samaritan and are possessed by a demon? Jesus answered, I'm not possessed by a demon, but I honor my Father, and yet you dishonor me. I'm trying to get praise. I'm not trying to get praise for myself. There is one who demands it, and he also judges. I tell you the solemn truth. If anyone obeys my teaching, he will never see death. In typical Jesus fashion, they ask him an answer. He gives an answer, and then he gives a lot more that they're just like, what are we going to do with this, right? They're like, hey, are you a Samaritan? And he could have just said no. But he says, no, if you do what I'm telling you to do, you will not see death. And so they ask about that. They're like, are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. And then they ask this question, who do you think you are? What is your name? What is your title? What gives you the authority to talk about this kind of stuff? Who do you think you are that you talk about people not dying? Who are you? They say, your father Abraham, He says, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old, they said, and you have seen Abraham? And they're confused. He's talking about never dying. He's talking to Abraham, who lived generations before him. And they're saying, you've talked to Abraham? Who do you think you are, Jesus? Who do you think you are to do these miracles? Who do you think you are that you can talk about getting rid of people's sin? Who do you think you are that you can teach with such authority? Who do you think you are that you can talk about telling people that they cannot die and stuff like that? Who do you think you are? And he says, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. Do you want to know who you're talking to, he says? Do you want to know my title? Do you want to know what I'm capable of? Do you want to know where I came from? Do you want to know my real name? Do you want to know who sent me? He says, I am. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. I am the one who can take care of your pains and your problems. And when I tell you I can lift depression, I can lift depression. When I tell you I can mend a relationship, I can mend a relationship. When I tell you that the finances will come in, the finances will come in. When I see you, I don't just see your face, I see your soul. Because I am. And they freaked out when he said this. This is blasphemy. This is the stuff that gets you killed. Now, the Jews didn't have the ability to just execute somebody. So they had to use his title as king. They used his title as king for grounds to try him. And they used his name, the fact that he equated himself with God, as motivation to kill him. Now, when they take him to Pilate, and they tell him, hey, this guy claims to be a king. That's how they're going to get him to be killed. It says from this point on, Pilate tried to release him. But the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Then they shouted, away with him, crucify him. Pilate asked, shall I crucify your king? The high priest replied, the high priest, we don't have anything like this. Maybe the Pope would be the closest example I can come up with. The most holy person, the leader of Judaism at the time, says, we have no king except for Caesar. Then Pilate handed him over to be crucified. And as he does that, he does a very interesting thing. It's interesting in the fact of how specific it was. It was not uncommon. When you crucified somebody, you would put a sign above their head and it would state their crime. And then that way, as people walked by, because crucifixion took days, as people walked by and saw this person slowly dying, they would see the crime that they had committed and know what happens if they did the same. And above says Pilate had a note prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Remember when the Magi showed up at the palace? They showed up for the birth of a king. And here, as Jesus dies, his title is king. Jesus was born as a king, he dies as a king, but he still reigns as a king. Because that baby that was born 2,000 years ago was not the great I was, he's the great I am. And the great I always will be. Do not be afraid, for I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever. Hey, we do this thing where we have these next steps. In your bulletins, if you're on the app, you can do it somewhere on there as well. And I just want to kind of dissect this a little bit, because it's all good and well to come and listen. But if we don't maybe change something in our lives, maybe we've missed an opportunity. So here's my first one for you, is maybe this is your day to put your hope in the God who has a name. Maybe for the first time ever, you realize that, oh my gosh, this whole Christmas thing is actually about the God of the universe. That God not just has a name, but knows my name, that wants the best for me, that wants to walk day and day with me, and today is your day to do that. Maybe you say, hey, man, it was a couple days before Christmas in 2024 that I decided that I was going to be a follower of Jesus, that I was going to take this story, his story, and I was going to make it my story as well. And I'll pray here in a second, and I'll help you do that and make that decision in my prayer as well. Maybe for you, a good next step is to read the birth story with fresh eyes of Jesus as this God King, okay? If you read Luke chapter 2, Luke is in the New Testament. Use your table of contents if you don't know where that is. There's no shame in that, right? And just read this one chapter. Just read Luke 2. This is something I like to read to my kids around this time, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Just read this verse, or this chapter. But I want you to think about it as the God of the universe coming to earth to claim his kingship. Right? Not just 8-pound, 6-ounce baby Jesus in the manger, right, outside the Methodist church. Okay? It's the real God of the universe coming to dwell among us as our king. Which takes me to the last one. Maybe it's time to recognize the birth of our king. Now, this is different for us, right? We don't live in a culture that has a king or really even understands kingship. But a few years ago, I read a book called How God Became King by N.T. Wright, and it really started to shift my focus on this. That understanding what a king, having a king in my life would mean for me if I actually had a physical king, and then how that relates to Jesus. And maybe having Jesus as the king in my life will dictate some of the ways that I live my life, some of the things that I do and I don't do. Because I believe that Jesus didn't come to just be a baby. I think he did come to die on a cross, but I think he came for so much more. I really believe he came to be king of our lives today.